before we dive into the business itself, let me have you tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are as a person, what you like to do for fun, things like that.
Sure. I'm Stu Landesberg. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Grove Collaborative. Starting with who I am as a person. So I grew up in northern Westchester County, New York. Had parents who are, I would say, somewhat progressive when it comes to environmentalism. And so grew up in a relatively environmentally conscious household, but joined the business world nonetheless after college, moved out to California, San Francisco, going on maybe 11 years ago, and worked briefly in business out here, mostly for a firm called TPG Capital before starting Grove, and married to a wonderful entrepreneur named Stuart Landesberg with 2 kids and a dog, and living the parent dream, just like everyone else in this interesting shelter-in-place moment. We get to see more of our kids than usual. I should say our 3-year-old may make a special appearance in this podcast.
Definitely. And obviously, we're in a pretty unique time right now, but prior to the business, you said you were doing a little bit of business outside of the company, obviously. Where did the inspiration come, or where'd the idea kind of come out of for starting this thing up?
When I was younger, when I was 10 years old, I thought that all paper towels were brown and every family had a compost bin in their backyard. I didn't understand that convenience really rules the day when it comes to the products we buy for our day-to-day lives. And so I've always been curious about the home and personal care product categories in particular, because there are really wonderful natural brands that have reached price and performance parity with conventionals. And so why aren't more people buying them? And then when I was working at TPG, I covered consumer retail and also internet. And on the consumer retail side, I spent a lot of time in and around grocery businesses, and came to understand that the distribution ecosystem in this country is responsible for what most Americans see on shelf, which is where most Americans, at least prior to the current moment, bought most of their sort of consumer products. And came to realize that there was an opportunity to use digital distribution, to use the internet, to bring natural products to folks for whom they may not have previously either been available or for whom they felt inaccessible, either because of cost, complication, or for some other reason that they felt excluded from the category.
For sure. And I'm fairly confident, thanks to the little bit of background we've gained from you. But I got to ask, is this the very first business for you, or have you started anything before?
This is the first one that I've started.
Definitely. And I guess, was there any particular person or place that inspired you to start the business? How did you decide that you wanted to start a business rather than try and go in with one of these other companies out there that might have been doing something similar?
It's a great question. I think everybody probably has a different sort of moment, but for me, I love to do, and I really enjoy actually investing. I find it to be intellectually fascinating, and you get to work with wonderful business leaders. But I didn't find that my 9 to 5 or 7 to 10, as the case more often than not is, was driving enough positive change in the world. If I did a great job at my job that day, was the world a little better for it? And so I felt, this calling to do something that left me sort of more fulfilled on a personal level at the end of every day. And at the same time, really had spent enough time in grocery, consumer, retail to believe that the 2 most important trends in this giant sector are offline to online and conventional to natural. Right? The first trend, offline to online, being one that I'm as well suited as anyone to try to prosecute. The second, conventional to natural, being one where I may not have had a lot of experience, but certainly have a ton of passion for making the category healthier for humans and more sustainable for the planet.
Definitely. So, in a sense, you took something that was already part of your life and have now effectively built a business out of it.
Yeah, I wanted to solve the problem for myself, because I noticed that when I was busy, I wasn't buying products that matched my value system. And so every time I washed my hands, did the dishes, did the laundry, I had this cognitive dissonance of I'm a good person, but the products I'm using don't reflect that. And so I wanted to solve that for myself and make sure that I always had products that reflected my value system, and realized, from my work outside of sort of my own home, that this was a problem that probably could be solved for many people and was a real and large scale opportunity.
Definitely. So let's start to jump into the business now. The first few years, and if I recall correctly, you started in 2012.
That's right.
The first, we'll call it, I guess, 1 to 3-ish, depending, obviously, getting it off the ground. What was it like? Where did you start? How'd you
Yeah.
get the ball rolling?
The first 4 years were the hardest years of my career, professionally, personally, really challenging. So started with a ton of hubris and naivety about what entrepreneurship means, how easy it is to start a consumer internet business. I did not understand. I did not know what I did not know. And so those first couple of years were really challenging. It took us 4 years to raise significant institutional capital and really get sort of the kind of traction that makes it feel like your business is going to have staying power. And 4 years is a long time to be on that grind without results. Specifically, though, when I first started the business, I started it sort of like in the spare bedroom in my apartment, and recruited two friends, one who was able to quit his job and the other who had just gotten married. And so he needed to work until we had at least a little bit of money to pay him better, but was working nights and weekends. And the three of us made as much progress as we could. Me sort of on the business side, my co-founder Jordan on the brand side and creative, and then Chris, my co-founder, on the technology side. And for that first year and a half, it was pretty much the three of us. We added a couple of team members, some temporarily, some are still actually with us today. But 3 years in, I think we were probably 8 employees, and we're closer to 1,500 today. So the business has been around for a little bit less than 8 years. And I tell people that for the majority of the time that Grove has been around, we were fewer than 20 employees, which is not something that I think folks who join, once the company is more established, necessarily can appreciate. So it was a really challenging first 4 years. When we finally pitched our Series A in 2016, I went to 175 different investors and got 175 no's before I eventually convinced someone to write a check. It was, and I have dozens of stories from that 4-year period. But ultimately, I think we stayed close to our consumer and made a number of changes because of that. And that closeness to the consumer is what drove the pivots that ultimately allowed us to be successful.
Absolutely. And getting all those no's, what does that do to you as a person? Does it
Uh,
diminish that confidence, or did you ever feel yourself questioning whether this was the right path to really take?
yes. um, it does diminish confidence. I think one of the hardest jobs, but potentially the most important job of the CEO, is emotional control. And I don't know if that has ever been harder than when you're out there every day getting rejected multiple times a day. And I'll tell you now that it's much easier for us to raise money, but I still feel it personally when it's a rejection. And especially as a founder, when for me, I'd poured my life into this thing for 4 years, and I didn't think I was asking for anything that unreasonable. But to hear no so consistently, it is challenging. Um, but you just sort of keep on going. And I think it really is true as an entrepreneur that the only time things really stop is when you quit. So yeah, I think the only time things stop is when you quit. And so I viewed it as one of my strengths and one of the things that I brought to the company, that I could take this many rejections and keep going. And I think even now, my willingness to take risk is informed by my willingness to hear news that I don't want.
For
Because
sure.
inevitably, if you're only hearing yeses, then you're probably not asking high enough.
Definitely. And you mentioned there you had some pretty close connection to your customers that aided in finding some of those pivots. Who were those kind of initial customers or people that you were marketing to in a sense?
So our initial customers were our first group of customers were customers who we met in San Francisco at coffee shops. The first 100 customers I recruited sort of through hand-to-hand combat in coffee shops before we even had a website. All we had was a PowerPoint prototype, and I would click them through it and tell them what they were going to get and ask them at the end if they wanted to buy it. I took their credit card through a little square reader and mailed them the products that my co-founders and I would pack up at the end of every day in the mailroom. From there, the next set of customers really came to us fairly organically. We were quite early in influencer marketing, and we had a set of influencers who found us almost by accident and had really strong success promoting us to their communities. And it was through that which we came to understand that the core customer for this business isn't me. I had built it originally being self-referential. It's young families, primarily in second tier markets in small cities. And obviously we pick up folks like me who are busy professionals living in cities and who want to do the right thing for the environment. But actually the deeper connection that we'd made was with homemakers who really wanted to do the right thing for their families. And that group came fairly organically to Grove over those first few years. And that informed our positioning, because the positioning to the 29-year-old mother of two working as a substitute teacher in Lawrence, Kansas, is different than the positioning to a young professional in San Francisco, California. And I would say amazingly, or perhaps not amazingly, really wonderfully, there's a tremendous amount of common ground among all of the groups that we end up speaking to, be they folks who live in states that vote red or vote blue, or higher income, lower income. People really genuinely want to create a home that's a great place for their families. And many people, climate change has become politicized, but there is nobody who is in favor of more single-use plastic. There's nobody who's against planting trees. And so we found really a wonderful amount of consistency in the reception that we get to a lot of our positive messaging.
Absolutely. So you mentioned obviously you had the three starting co-founders and then started to expand slowly, largely staying around 20-ish employees for the majority of that time. When did things start to expand? When did revenue truly start coming in the door?
Yeah, when did it get spicy? Totally. So in 2016, we made a pretty big pivot, which was to move the business away from just being a retail platform that connected consumers with some of the really wonderful natural brands that exist in the market today: Seventh Generation, Method, Mrs. Meyer's, Burt's Bees, Baby Organics, folks like that, to understanding that all of the businesses that have been built today have been built for a model where brick and mortar has to be the majority of the business. But the fact that we are online first, and the fact that we have access directly to customer data, means that our product development doesn't have to look like any other brand that's ever existed. And so in 2016, we changed the focus of the company from a consumer perspective to focus on the broader audience, and also changed our focus to start thinking about ways that we could really innovate in our own product lines for the consumer. And so as we've grown from where we were in 2016 to today, we've seen our own brands go from effectively zero to the majority of our sales, slight majority, just over 50%. And they complement quite well the really exceptional products made by many of the third-party partners in the marketplace and offer a really complete offering to a diverse range of consumers, united under the banners of trying to create a healthy home that is better for the environment.
Absolutely. And obviously, you started small, but as things grew, were the risks growing along with that? Were you at any point in time worried that if everything kind of went up in a ball of flame, you would be out on the street or anything like that?
I luckily, never worry about being out on the street. It worked a couple of years at a pretty good paying job, and so didn't have a lot of savings, but enough to put gas in the Prius, and figured I would have enough time to find myself a new job before the savings ran out. Um, but I think the risk that was so hard for me as a founder, and I'll just speak about myself personally here, was the identity risk. And I had sort of thought of myself early in my career as a high performing professional. I was really proud of what I'd accomplished in my relatively brief investing career. And having spent 4 years on a project and gotten zero traction, and if things had gone differently, if I'd gotten 176 no's, I would have kept going. But if I had never gotten to yes, right, and had to wind the thing down after 4 years, what does that say about me? And for me, that was a really hard thing to grapple with. The idea that, my self-image as a conscientious but hardworking, strong professional who could really get stuff done was, in some way false. And, at some point through, coaching and therapy and actual business progress, sort of came to grips with living in the moment a little bit more. But I think for me, and for many entrepreneurs probably, the combination of identity and success, professional success, is so, there's the circles overlap so much that it's not about, could I get another job before I ran out of savings? I think probably most people who start companies, not all, but many of them, have really marketable skills that can go get another job. But it's the feeling of saying I failed after a track record of believing that I can do this that I think generates a lot of real stress in the entrepreneur community.
Absolutely.
I
So,
will say, people are like, celebrates failure, fail, all that stuff. Like, we sell this. It never felt like that for a day. I've never thought it was okay to fail.
for sure. There was an expectation that you should find success.
Yeah. Have to. There is only
Definitely.
one outcome. And that is a stressful operating mentality.
For sure. So, having overcome the failure and potential overall failure, where along the way would you say that things went right? What were some kind of key highlights to finding success along the way?
Yeah. I would say the two things that I got right are the two most important things in any business. Number one, we got the market right. The two trends I identified in the beginning, conventional to natural, offline to online, we didn't have to get things perfect because both of those are big macro growth areas. And I have, even more so today, where the market is going, there is more opportunity. And so we got the trends right, number one. But number two is even more important, which is people are the most important thing. And my two co-founders, Chris and Jordan, still work at the company, still super, super important leaders on the team, and still good friends. And, I am so lucky to come to work every day with a high integrity, high performing executive team that demands the best of each other for the sake of our customers. And I think if there's one thing I've learned along the way, it's that people are the most important thing, even more than you could even expect. And every time that we invest in our people, I find I find the returns to be terrific. And so I think any success that we've had at Grove can be attributed directly to the quality of the people on the team. I really am so lucky to have such a great group of colleagues.
For sure. And on that note of people, obviously you have your two co-founders alongside you, but have there been any other key individuals along the way that have really made things happen for you?
Oh my gosh, there are so many key individuals. And I think there are people who are 2 or 3 years out of college sitting in an incredibly important seat, doing an amazing job at their job and really making a difference for the company, right? All 1,500 people are better off because this coordinator level person is crushing her job today. And I don't want to call any particular people out because I think of business as it's a chain of events, right? From when the customer places an order, well, when the customer first hears about us to when we get that product into the customer's hands. And if we fall down anywhere on that chain, it doesn't happen. And so every link, every person in that chain is wildly important. And we're not a huge company, and every person truly matters. And yeah, I really am. I'm thinking through dozens of folks in my head for whom I have deep gratitude for the hard work they do.
Absolutely. And to take you from a positive side of things to a little bit more negative, just because I got to poke at it.
Poke.
Along the way, were there any big mistakes where you wish you could have gone back and done things differently?
Oh my gosh, so many big mistakes. I'll start with an obvious one. I named the company ePantry. Ugh, ugh. I'm so embarrassed even to say it. Uh, but I didn't know. I didn't understand consumer brand when I started in 2012. I thought the brand was going to be all about simplicity and convenience. I didn't realize at first that it was going to be about emotional connection. And boy, am I glad that I've had great people around me to teach me what really matters in building enduring consumer brands. So all the way from naming the business ePantry to biting off new product lines to there was one point where we thought about white labeling our software in 2014 because we hadn't gotten consumer adoption, and I wasted a ton of our team's time thinking about how we could white label this for one of the big CPG companies. I made just about every mistake that a CEO could make. And the only reason we made it through is because I had great people around me. But every mistake that one could make, I think I made at some point along the way. But I have been surprised consistently by the extent to which sticking closely to our mission and investing in good people is always the answer.
For sure. And in the midst of those mistakes, were there any big sacrifices you personally had to make to keep things going?
There's the typical, I didn't take a salary for the first year and a half. There are a number of times where I wrote a personal check into the company to make sure that payroll cleared. But I think the big personal sacrifice that founders make is being the everything of last resort, right? I think being a founder, if you're a good servant leader, and really being a good servant leader CEO means if there's a terrible job in the company, a terrible thing, and I'm on that team, I have to do that job because I can't ever ask someone to do a job that I wouldn't do. And so, have there been personal sacrifices financially? Of course, there are big personal sacrifices financially when you start up. Are there personal sacrifices in terms of the number of hours I've worked? Of course, absolutely. Opportunity cost of many earning years when, before we figured it out, there's no guarantee that the second 4 years of the book go so much differently than the first four. But I really think the big sacrifice is the commitment to be always on. And, there are no off days when you're a founder CEO. There are no off days. Every day you're making sure, to the fullest extent you can, that the business gets a little bit better. Um, and I think that's a real privilege, but it also is a sacrifice in a lot of ways. And I should say, for what it's worth, I have a ton of gratitude, not just to my colleagues, but to my family and to my wife for supporting me uh, through what's a really, really big commitment to do right.
Definitely. And with all of that falling on your shoulders, is there anything or task you had to do that really rubbed you the wrong way or that you just flat out didn't enjoy having to do?
It's innumerable. I closed the books from 2012 to 2017 myself every month. I will say I did a terrible job closing the books because I am not an accountant, but like somebody needed to do it. Um, like my co-founders and I would split up who deals with payroll, who deals with insurance, who deals with the landlord, who deals with all of the who cleans the bathroom, all of the day-to-day, all of those mechanics. In the early days, you split them up. And, even now, I am really deliberate about if there's brutal data entry tasks, I take on some of those. Because I really try to be a member of the team, not just a leader of the team. And I think so highly of the folks that I work with that I would never again ask them to do something that I wouldn't feel comfortable getting my own hands dirty on. So yeah, I've had to do a bunch of really crappy stuff, from literally cleaning the bathroom in the early days, all the way through, a brutal data entry task last week. For the first couple of years of the business, when we worked in an accelerator, we didn't have our own office. I didn't have to clean the bathroom, but at the end of every day, we would go down and pack the boxes in the basement every day, and then wheel them to the UPS store. And some days we were late, and so it's some crazy guy running down the street. The UPS store was 4 blocks away from where our little co-working space was. I think our average day we had 3 big boxes, and so I've got 3 big boxes on a dolly, running down the street with all these business people to the UPS store every afternoon. It was, in retrospect, I'm not sure that was good use of time, but you do what you got to do to move from 1 to 2 to 3, just a step forward every day.
Definitely. So regardless of what it was, taking that boots on the ground, hands in the dirt approach really helped you guys find success, and you led by example along the way.
I try to. I don't always get it right, but I do try.
Absolutely. And to bring you back up to a positive now, what would you say are the biggest perks of the position that you hold in the company?
The biggest perk is that I get to work with amazing, like-minded people every day. The people at Grove are brilliant, and they care. We put together this great video for Earth Day that talked about all of the accomplishments. We're on our way to planting 1 million trees in the US. We're the only plastic neutral company in our space, which, if you think about the amount of plastic our industry creates, to be plastic neutral is incredible. We'll ship, I don't know, tens of millions of plastic bottles this year, and we will offset every ounce of that impact. And we are on our way to being plastic free in 5 years. We offset all of our carbon when we do this have an amazing environmental footprint, so different than any company in our industry before. And almost none of that was done by me. It was all done by brilliant people who understood how to incorporate sustainability into our products, how to go build a business that could both generate profit and return for investors, and at the same time leave the planet better off than we found it, and at the same time deliver a great product experience with improved health outcomes for our consumers. And very little of it was done by me. I get to show up to work every day with these people and this team that figured out a way to make 1 + 1 + 1 = 12. And that's a privilege. It's such a privilege. And I do not take for granted that there's 1,500 people coming to work every day on a vision that I started. It's not just mine anymore. But oh my gosh, what a privilege. And I am grateful for it every day.
Absolutely. And I got to ask, just because it's one of our favorite questions here, granted, you have a pretty seemingly great place to work and great environment to work in on top of that. But is there anything about the business that keeps you up at night or that you're really worried about?
And well, in the pre-COVID era, there were hundreds of things. Now there's thousands. Uh, the number one thing that I always think about is our people. And I've given that answer a lot of times, but we're still a small company, right? And so each person holds unique knowledge, unique value. We're not super redundant. And so I think a lot about, okay, what happens if X person, I don't want to say gets hit by a bus, but like, that equivalent. And we've been lucky to have really good employee retention over time. But that's the thing I think the most about over the long term. Right now, the number one thing that matters to me, I guess two number ones, are coming through for our customers in a moment of need. We hear from them consistently how getting a box of Grove product reminds them or makes them feel great about the home that they are keeping and spending more time in under shelter in place. And so in that way, we are contributing in a very real, perhaps small, but very real way to keeping people safe. And the company's vision statement is that consumer products will be a positive force for human and environmental health. And it's never been more clear the way that we are improving human health than right now. So that's number one. The other number one is the health of our employees across all of our geographies, from the team that we have in New York who's working from home to the folks who are still coming to our fulfillment centers every day as workers delivering essential products to millions of families across the country. The US is better off because of, and I think has been able to make progress in part because folks are able to get a lot of products delivered, and us delivering essentials, especially essentials that are healthy for consumers, is a really important part of that. And so my gratitude towards our frontline workers in our fulfillment centers is always extreme, and particularly now so in this moment where they're delivering not just for us, but really for our community and our country.
Absolutely. So we've traveled through the beginnings up to present day essentially at this point, and the good and the bad along the way. Let's transition now a little towards the future. We'll take what could potentially be called your primary job objective of being a visionary for the company in a sense. What are you most excited about for the business moving forward?
I'm most excited for the ability for our changes to have a real impact on the industry. We are so small. Our whole company is less than 10% of the size of the Tide business in the US. It's incredible. Like, we are a speck of dust relative to the size of the industry. But we're getting bigger and have millions of customers who have turned to us for a number of reasons, but who are buying into a value system that accepts accountability for the environmental and health impact of the products that we sell. And none of the things we did to get plastic neutral are super proprietary. We've talked about our partnership with Plastic Bank and how we think about that and how we think about creating economic incentives to reduce plastic over time. All of this stuff is available to every company out there. And I am so excited for, our vision isn't every household in America buys from Grove. It's that consumer products will be a positive force for human and environmental health. And the larger our company gets, the bigger the wake that we leave, and the stronger the belief that conscientious products can really win, and that consumerism and environmentalism don't have to be at odds.
Definitely. And for those number orientated listeners that we do have, are there any specific goals or anything like that that you guys are setting for the future?
We don't disclose sort of specific revenue or customer level goals, but I think over the long term, the goal is to be the largest consumer products company in the world. I think we have a huge advantage in that we are building for a world where digital is the norm and digital first is the norm. And we are blessed to not have the the real challenge of how do you balance a legacy business with the growth business for the future. We can just focus on the growth business. And I believe that purity of operating plan is a strategic advantage. And so, yeah, the goal for us is quite explicit: to become the largest consumer products company in the world. May take us 100 years, but I think we can do it. Hopefully it'll take us less than 100 years. I'd like to be alive to see it.
Absolutely. And granted, we are in the midst of world change right now, but what would you say are the biggest threats or risk factors facing the industry that you guys operate in?
I think the biggest threat is if people go backwards in terms of a lot of the real education around the efficacy of natural products. For a long time, there was a stigma that natural products either didn't work or were too expensive. And neither of those is true. The CDC still recommends today using non-antibacterial hand soap. And I think that if we go back to a world of believing marketing claims over science in a lot of these places, we would see a real risk of delaying the inevitable of moving to more plant-based formulations with more conscientious packaging. I would say, thankfully, I haven't seen that happening, but it's something that I do worry about, because we are entering, or perhaps are already in, a little bit of a post-truth world, and that can be a challenging environment to make sure that what truly is progress is seen as progress by all constituents.
Definitely. And without necessarily naming names or calling anybody out, are there any real big competitors out there challenging you guys in this space, or do you feel like you guys are kind of the front runners right now?
Our biggest competitors are some of the biggest companies in the world, and they are amazing at building brands, have amazing resources when it comes to R&D, and unbelievable global distribution reach. Our advantage is that we're so closely connected to our customer. And I believe that we care about our customer in a way that is totally, you can only happen in sort of like the magic of the soup, which is like the soup tastes better when it's made with love. And I think that connection to the consumer gives us unique data that allows us to do rapid cycle innovation that's only possible when you own everything from consumer relationship through R&D through distribution. And I think that gives us an advantage against even incredible large companies that have been successful for hundreds of years.
Absolutely. And my big question that I love to ask, as the founder, the guy that started it all, with some help along the way, obviously,
Yeah.
if the opportunity arose, or if you've already been asked, contacted, offered, whatever you want to call it, would you ever want to sell the company?
We've gotten M&A offers before, and we get contacted not super frequently, but fairly frequently. But I think the future is so exciting that I am heads down focused on execution and building growth to be the best it can possibly be for our consumers. That's where I'm focused. That's where our team is focused. And, I believe that good things will follow. But at the moment, we are 100% heads down on creating the best possible experience for our consumers.
Definitely. The goal is to stay connected, keep building, truly keep the revolution going.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
It's not easy building revolution, competing with a bunch of these, really big companies. And I think I value the company's ability to keep its eye 100% on that ball.
Absolutely. So for our final transition now, let's talk a little about entrepreneurship kind of as its own outside of the business. For someone looking to start something up, get into the industry, get their own ball rolling, what would be your biggest points of advice?
Two really strong points of advice. The first is do something that you love, because it's gonna be really hard a lot of the time. Even now, I mean, the company may seem successful on the outside, and I think we've made a lot of progress. That doesn't mean it gets easy, right? There's a Mike Tyson expression which I like, which is everyone has a plan until you get punched in the mouth. And it feels like that sometimes as a CEO, right? You can make a great plan and then you get something happens. And so it's really important that you love the industry you're in and love the why. Love the way the world changes if you're successful. Is number one. And number two, I know you're going to be shocked to hear this, is the people that you do it with matter more than anything else. Especially that early team. The DNA of the first 5 people create the DNA of the first 50 people, who create the DNA of the first 250, who create the DNA of the first 1,000, and so on. And you can't be, even in the very early days, people are still the most important thing.
Definitely. And on the note of wonderful Mike Tyson quotes, are there any other quotes, people, books, anything like that that you personally look to for inspiration that others could get their hands on as well?
Yeah, there's in our headquarters in San Francisco, there's a quote on the wall of the staircase between each floor. And my 2 favorites are one by Margaret Mead, which is never doubt that a small group of well-intentioned citizens can change the world. It is the only thing that ever has, which I think speaks to the fact that even though we are small, do not underestimate our impact. And that every movement starts small, definitionally. And I love how empowering that is. The second is a quote from Anne Frank, which is how wonderful it is that no one must wait a single moment before starting to improve the world. And I really believe that business is just a combination of small acts, and the things that people do when the lights are on them, and the things that people do when the lights are not. And there are so many good choices that we can make for how we treat our colleagues, how we treat our communities, how we treat our customers, how we treat our environments. And I want to see our team making those right decisions every moment. And I really do believe that that quote is prescient, that no matter the circumstance we find ourselves in, even today, we always have the ability, have agency to make the situation in the world better.
For sure. And before I get to our catch-all wrap-up question, I like to just open things up for any final pieces of advice, comments, any topics we might have missed along the way that you'd love for us to get into.
I think the biggest one that we haven't spent a ton of time on is the misconception that social entrepreneurship and what I'll call sort of the profit motive or traditional sort of competitive capitalism are mutually exclusive. I really think that in today's economy, being a conscientious business is a strategic advantage in terms of recruiting employees, the right kind of employees, recruiting the right kind of customers. And I guess that's another piece of advice that I would say, if you're starting a business today, it needs to have a mission, and not a bullshit one. Like, if the mission is, automate outbound marketing emails so people can spend more time with their families, like, there's probably a better spin for that. I just think that one of the biggest risks in society today is that brilliant people are working on unimportant problems. And I think that there is no better way to address the most important problems in the world than through business. And if you're thinking about it today, I would say, get out there and go for it, and please do it in a way that leaves our society and our world better than we found it.
Absolutely. And to hit on that final question now, at this point in time, obviously you've gone through a whole bunch up until this point. It's been a journey, and it's going to continue being a journey, hopefully long into the future, preferably not 100 years to reach that ultimate goal, but you never know. We could all be still around at that point in time, depending on how technology goes for us. But to hit on the final question, making it through all of this, building the business and continuing to hopefully do so in the future, what would you say right now that you're most grateful for in your life?
In my life, I'm most grateful for my family. There's no question. You know, get to spend extra time with them, sort of, during shelter in place, and you know, I think we are only as strong and happy as the people around us. And I am lucky to have a wonderful wife and two terrific children, and a terrific dog. And I really am super grateful to have had a loving family growing up, and you know, loving in-laws, and a really wonderful home to participate in.
Absolutely. Surrounded by a group of incredible individuals and running a business now that's making a change and starting a revolution and taking on all those corporate giants, I would absolutely say that the story you've brought for us today, Stu, has been inspirational for those listeners. And I absolutely thank you for coming on and sharing it with us.
No, it's my pleasure, and I hope that wrap up makes it seem like I've got everything figured out, which is definitely not the case. I get punched in the mouth on a daily basis now, just as ever. But I really am grateful that that a couple of balls have bounced my way over the last few years, and I appreciate the chance to tell the story.
Absolutely. We're very happy to have you on today.
My pleasure. Thanks again.